what things in your head do you want to make sure we get in today?
Well, I think that you already mentioned the subjects that are of interest because, of course, you interview me. This podcast is not about me, but about, I think, the work that we did in the Fire Service Academy in the Netherlands and why maybe also.
Hmm.
Well, what is maybe this is the right moment to do this because in the meanwhile, maybe you know that Dan Steffens from the Wales Inspectorate has written a report. And he got in touch with me and he sent me the report. I was, of course, I didn't know about it, but of course I was very surprised, but also happy that to see that now our work also has crossed the North Sea. And in meanwhile,
Eventually.
now at the moment, I'm preparing a visit for four of the fire chiefs from Wales and also from of the fire chiefs from the NFCC who want to visit the Netherlands. And what is maybe a different to see how we are doing it, what kind of training center we use, etc. And I always think that maybe the biggest cultural difference between the UK and the Netherlands is that the UK has a very top-down way of thinking. At least that is my impression. So, for example, they ask, how long did it take and how much did it cost for you to implement all these new ideas? And then I don't have the answer because in my opinion it was mostly a bottom up process where people just started doing things. So and that is maybe the biggest message. Yes, it is not about having knowledge or doing experiments, but it is how to involve firefighters and that they start believing
Mate, you are
what
pushing on an open door there. So that's effectively the whole purpose of the podcast. I think you've
yes
probably you've probably epitomized it better than I could, putting it into words, articulating it in that fashion. Because I've always said to people, it's easier to ask forgiveness and permission. And also, I
yeah
always say, like, be less impressed, more involved. Like, we will look
yes
at
and maybe
the Paul Grimwoods, the Ricardos of the world, the Stefan Svensons,
yes
all of these great people, the John McDonoughs, the Carol Lamberts, and all this sort of stuff, and go, oh, wow, 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 wow. And I am wow. I am wow. I've not written
yeah
any of that stuff. I've not, I am very much in awe of it. But be part of the conversation. Start getting in the sand pit yourself and messing about. Not messing about dangerously, but we used to be 40, 50 years ago. We used to be quite close to the tip of the sword in development and research and, back
yeah
to the
yeah
Braidwood days of nearly 80, 90 years ago when that stuff was going on. Now, we seem to only be good. No, this is going to be really harsh. I was going to say, we still lead the way on writing policies. But in terms of our firefighter base level tactical knowledge of fire behavior, we seem, in my visceral feeling, to have really, really, really fallen behind. Really
yes
fallen behind. Like you referenced, oh, it's great to start seeing some of the research that you've done coming across the pond and finally being embedded. Because we'll use everything from here moving forwards. Like, help us connect the dots. When did you first start doing some of the research into things such as the Quadrant Model? When did your sort of voracious desire to develop this knowledge
yeah
start?
that is an interesting question and also a funny question, because everybody thinks like maybe that I thought out everything so that I had some kind of objective. My only objective was that I wanted to prevent firefighters from dying in a fire. And that is, of course, my history because in Amsterdam, when I was a junior officer, we had an accident where three colleagues died and I knew them. And so this was for me a very, very, let's say, a critical event. And some years afterwards, and meanwhile, I was a deputy chief in Amsterdam. We had a second incident somewhere in the Netherlands, in the north of the Netherlands, where again three firefighters died. And they asked me and a colleague, my predecessor as a fire professor, to investigate, to evaluate. And that is when we thought like, okay, we don't want this to happen again. This is so awful for the persons, of course, for our colleagues, but also for their families and for their firefighter station, for all their colleagues. So we should do something about it. And then somehow it grew organically. So then we were thinking, hey, what is happening here? So everybody, that was our conclusion. All the firefighters in the Netherlands would have done exactly the same tactics, would have used the same tactics, the same ways they would have approached this fire. So this fire and these colleagues would have died anywhere in the Netherlands. And that is when we started thinking together like, hey, but maybe this is a system error. Maybe we started doing things in the wrong way. And that is when we thought that always, no matter what, entering a building on fire is maybe not the right way to look at it anymore, because this fire event, this rapid fire event, it turned out that we already knew that it existed, but the firefighters didn't. And so the fires had changed. And then we started looking at these pictures, and even we started looking all over the Netherlands. And then it turned out that these kind of fires happened many more times, and even in Warwick. In the UK. We saw such a fire where also colleagues died, and where the fire officers were on trial for many years. Maybe you remember that fire. That was exactly the same time, I think 2007 or 2008. So we didn't think that we should invent a quadrant model, and we did not think that we should research that and that we find basic principles. But we just started thinking like, hey, maybe we should introduce other options for firefighters to do. And to be honest, these other options already exist.
Connect the dots for listeners. So that's Ian Reid, John Avarice, Ashley Stevens, and Darren Yates. So they died at Atherstone-on-Soar, an episode that we've covered a few times on the podcast. And we're actually going to be having somebody on the podcast who attended that incident. They're going to be coming on in January. So a firefighter that attended that incident. Because again, the thing with debriefs sometimes, and you'll know this far better than me, I'd love to go into the detail of you mentioned about 2 incidents where 3 firefighters died, so I just want to stick a pin in that for a second. But what's your experience with debriefs and that retrospective learning process in terms of their transparency, the organizational fears, the ramifications of it? I always say to people, like, absolute certainty is only available in hindsight. You know, we don't have the liberty of the situation that was there, the context of their mindset, the training they've been through. And as you alluded to, many of us would have probably made the very same decisions and probably have found ourselves in a very similar position. So I don't think it's fair when we sometimes go, what did Ricardo do? Yeah, I always thought he was a rubbish firefighter. You know, oh yeah, da 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 da. You know, I'm like, no. That's not what we're here to do. That's not our job when we're investigating this. So give us, in whichever order you want, a bit of a context around how the debrief process works over there, and a little bit of context about the 2 incidents that you referred to that were a pivotal change for you.
Yes, that's a very good question, because in my opinion, and that is also what I try to tell everybody, is that we are always looking for errors. And maybe that was also a driving force for me to investigate how incident command works, how the human factor, yes, what happens in your brain under stress circumstances, how important that is. So, but to step back, you know, when I was a junior officer, and I already did my PhD when I started to study in the Fire Service Academy. So I did not grow in through the ranks, but I entered the fire service horizontally. But I always wanted to be a firefighter from when I was a little boy. So
talk to us about that horizontal entry, because people won't be as familiar with this in the UK. We obviously do things like direct entry, where people come in at a station manager process now from a different profession. But what's the process over there, just so people understand?
Well, both is possible in the Netherlands, but there was a moment that the fire service said that they wanted to have more leadership, more managers, and that is why they started to hire academically educated people like me. So, and then they started the fire service. In the Fire Service Academy, they started an officer's education for horizontal entry. But there are a lot of officers that, of course, that grew through the ranks. And I always wanted to be a firefighter, but I didn't have a profession, so I couldn't be a firefighter. I had to become an officer.
You used the words management and leadership there interchangeably.
Yeah.
Could you just explore the difference between that? Because in my experiences, it can be a real look if you get an academic who has leadership capabilities, because an academic, I believe, can make great managers. They're good at managing timelines, assets, resources, budgets. They can be good communicators at times, not always, but leadership is something very different. Do you sort of guard against having academics that don't make good leaders, and how do you develop the leadership over there?
Oh, now you open the subject.
This is a
That
podcast in
is quite
itself. Sorry, we've gone in a whole left turn here.
I think you are completely right, because what I see, of course, is a lot of academics that don't have the skills to be a leader, and maybe not even have the skills to be a good manager. So
They're
this is
good at
I think
research. Okay.
yeah, but this is how society. This is. And I don't know how to change that, but at the moment we do a lot of research into leadership. My statement is that to lead or to manage or to whatever you would call it, a fire service, you need to understand the DNA, the red culture of the fire service. If you don't understand, if you don't love it, then you are not able to lead a fire service, and not even capable of changing anything, because that is what all these guys want. The horizontal entries. Nowadays we have fire chiefs that don't even have fire service diplomas, and I don't say that that is wrong, but if they are just entering the fire service in order to change it because that is their assignment from the politicians, yeah, it is not going to work, and it never worked, and it still don't work. So
It
what
doesn't
I'm
have
doing
the
now is
same
I
level
want to.
of authenticity, does it? Which is
Yes,
sometimes a challenge. Like firefighters are very romantic. We want to feel that you also have a shared experience as me, and that you can understand the thing that you're passing judgment on. But I would push back, because I don't want us to get into an echo chamber. I would push back and say, at the very tippy top of chief fire officer leadership level, you're managing a multi-million pound organization. And I try and give the analogy of, like, if you are a fire service leader and you need to make a decision based around human resources or assets or law, then you will defer to your subject matter expert. I've got someone in my organization with a master's in accounting or a master's in human behavior. So I, as the leader, should defer to their knowledge. And sometimes non-fire service origin people that come in at leadership levels are better at doing that because they're used to doing it in a private organization. Sometimes the fault you can have, I think, with a firefighter like me making their way to the top of organization, which is perhaps something I'll probably never do, but even if I did, I could be too romantic about, look, I've been on a fire station for 20 years. I know how the fire service works. This is the answer. And you're like, Pete, you're probably a great firefighter, but you've got no idea about asset management. And we can make some massive financial blunders if we don't have that academic training, that rigor, those qualifications in those other areas. So I just wanted to balance that. This is my ADHD. Sorry, I keep jumping all over the place. Maybe take us back, and take us
yeah,
to
but because that is maybe I am an example of how it can work, because one I always wanted was a deputy chief. I had three fire chiefs, and all of a sudden there came a lady, and she used to be the director of the water company.
Okay.
And she said to me, "Okay, Ricardo, you are a good firefighter, so I want you to stay back. I will do the managing, and you are for the profession, and I will listen
Good
to you."
self-awareness.
And together we went around the fire service, and she was really authentically interested in how people think and what. And from her, I learned that you have to know the DNA of your organization, no matter if it is a fire service or a water company. And she found out that the water company has a completely different culture and DNA, because, with the water, nothing can be wrong. Everything should be according to procedures and
Everything's
protocols,
black and white. Everything's got
because if there is something
measurements.
wrong
Yeah.
with the water, it has very big consequences. Fire service is the other way around. We encounter situations where there is no protocol, where there is no procedure. We have to improvise a lot. And that is the culture of the fire service. And she taught me that. And for the first time, I experienced how shared leadership can work. And that is how I started believing in shared leadership, because no one has all the competencies to be the leader of such a big company with a lot of professionals on its own. So you always need people next to you and together. So it will always be teamwork. That is my strong belief that grew over the years, and that is still how I do it. And I always say to my colleagues, I am not perfect, so please fill in the gaps. and let's do it together, because I know that, for example, if you have if you talk about accountability of finances, it doesn't interest me. So I need somebody who is next to me and says, "Hey, Ricardo, maybe we should do like this or that," because all those details, I don't like details.
No.
I just like maybe I'm too much a firefighter, because I try to, you try something and you see how it works, and then if it doesn't work, you try something else. That is how, yeah, in my opinion, it works. But what we encounter now is a lot of leaders that don't have it, that don't realize, that don't have the competence to have shared leadership, but they still want to change the fire service. And what I try to do was the research at the moment, because we did a lot of research in Quadrant Model and that kind of things, firefighting. But at the moment, we are on the soft side. So what is improvisation? How can we support improvisation of our firefighters? But the leadership, what is the leadership on a fire station? It is quite different than maybe in the top of the organization. But all of them need to know what is so I think that there is let's say a relationship between the work that people have to do, the culture, and the leadership. If you want to be a leader in an organization and you don't take into account the culture and the work that people have to do, then you cannot be the leader. At least you will not be able to change anything. So this is what I'm trying to figure out now. What is exactly the work that firefighters do, to give them a voice, to give the firefighters a voice to the leadership, and then of course make a connection that I think, that is my let's say my hypothesis, that the fire service culture is directly connected to the work that people have to do. So it is influencing each other. And of course, somewhere, maybe in the culture, there is aspects that we don't like, that maybe are not, yeah, let's say, in the present era anymore what we want. For example, let's say there's a lot of discussion about inclusivity and diversity, and maybe also mobbing. But I think that is maybe the, let's say, that these are the outskirts of a culture that is functional for the work that people have to do. Firefighter humor, for example, jokes, etc. They are a part of they are influenced by the work that they do, and the other way around. If you don't have it, you cannot do the work. So there is, let's say, a mutual effect on both of them. And if you don't take into consideration these aspects, then you cannot lead that fire service. That is my hypothesis, and that's why I do a lot of research at the moment about that.
There's a few threads I want to pull on there. So, one, I love that aspect of shared leadership. It's not actually something I'm particularly familiar with. It's not something I've heard popularized in the UK, but it's certainly something I try to adopt on station. So, as an example, as a watch manager, I'll typically have 2 crew managers or leading firefighters, and then I'll have 10 firefighters or something like that on my watch. I've seen watch managers newly promoted into that role who I spoke to one a few weeks ago where they were like, I'm just waiting to get my road traffic collision instructor course. I need to get all my tickets. I want to get my BA instructors course. I want to get my rope instructors course. And I said, well, why do you want to do that? Because you've got Sarah on your watch, and Sarah's already a rope instructor, and you've got Dave, and he's a water instructor, and then you've got, so and so's been a BA instructor in training for 4 years, and now he's on your watch. Like, why do you need to get the courses as well? And he said, because I need to know that what they're teaching is correct, or I need to plan all of the training or whatever it might be. And I said, why do you need to do that? Like, why? Because with respect, no one's dying on that watch before you got there. There was no bad reports that so-and-so watch at so-and-so station's a complete shower of poo, and they're absolutely rubbish. You're not there to fix it. But there's this assumption, and I think there's maybe synonyms here around people struggling with delegation, with trust, with that shared leadership. Like Ricardo, because of his background, he may have a greater authenticity to communicate this than I would. Just because he doesn't do it the way I do it, doesn't make it wrong. And how do you stem that frustration? Like if you see someone that you're practicing shared leadership with and they're going about something a little bit differently to how you would go about it. But as long as they get the end result, and it might be very frustrating to you that they maybe get the end result easier than you would. But like, how do you discipline yourself not to, or how could other people discipline themselves to trust others with that aspect of shared leadership on a watch, a station, a department, and in a senior leadership position?
Yeah, well, that is a difficult question. Now, maybe it's not so difficult because, if I look back into my history, then of course maybe let's say I'm looking for the English word now.
Okay.
But that is of course what can happen if you open for a lot of opinions. Then sometimes, of most of the time, things do not go like you would thought that they would go, but you may be surprised of how it could be better than what you thought of.
Yeah, than the way you intended to do it.
And that is, of course, I wanted to get back to these debriefs, yes, because
Yes,
that is
please.
interesting. But of course, that is maybe the other side of how you have when you have shared leadership, then things will not always go like you wish.
That's the fear,
But that
yeah. If
doesn't mean
I'd
that
have
that
been
is
there,
wrong.
nothing would have gone wrong.
Yeah, but a lot of things in my life went differently than I thought. But I'm happy that it went like that. But my cat. But that is there are of course a lot of managers, a lot of people that want to stick to procedures and protocols, etc. And they are surprised. So, for example, my professorate was evaluated a few months ago, and there is a whole commission that are going to ask a lot of questions and they're going to study literature. And they said, "Well, Ricardo, very nice that you achieved a lot of compliments, but you didn't. It went like it went. Yes."
Yeah,
That was
yeah.
also my answer. How did you think out there? I didn't think. I didn't invent the quadrant model. And to be honest, most of the research led to different conclusions than I thought in advance.
And that's important, isn't it? You've got to not try and get data to suit your facts. You've got to come up with facts or come up with evidence out the back of your, because you don't want to get stuck in that that sort of recency bias that you've had a conversation with someone and now you're going to run a study to try and prove your theory. You've got to be
Yes,
open
yes.
to
Well,
saying, well, it'll be
maybe
what it'll be. Yeah.
maybe at the moment with leadership, I have an opinion which is based on experience, and it doesn't all turn out like I thought it would be. But I still think like, if it doesn't fit with my experience, then I'm trying to find a way to explain the
Yeah,
results in a
yeah,
way that they
yeah.
still help me. But for example, the quadrant model, so when we said the quadrant model, yes, you shouldn't always go in, but you can also try to put the fire out from outside. Of course, firefighters were asking Ricardo, but how are we going to do that? And at that moment, maybe 10,012 or whatever, the cold cutting systems came up and the fog nails, etc. So I thought, oh, maybe we should try making a hole in the wall and put some kind of innovative firefighting tool through the wall. And radar, you can use maybe radars to find out. And the fact eventually it went out that you don't need to innovate because it is just that we forgot to do the 360. Because if you know where the fire is, if you do a very good 360, if possible, of course, and that was of course the argument from the firefighters. They said, yeah, but Ricardo, that 360 it doesn't work always because sometimes you have gardens in the rear and you cannot get behind on the rear side of the building. But then I said, of course, yes, but if it is not possible, of course, then we have a different situation. But at the moment, we are not doing it at all.
Mhm.
And now we know that, for example, a wind-driven fire can be wind-driven when the wind is on the rear of the building. So if you don't know that, then you may be in a very dangerous situation if you open the front door. So but I didn't know that when I was a fire officer in Amsterdam. I didn't know that. So we found out maybe very, very basic things by thinking that we were doing some kind of, let's say, innovative research. So
Yeah, yeah.
I thought that we are going to find an innovative way to do it, and then we found, and the result was that we should do a 360 more often, because if you know where the fire is, it doesn't matter what kind of, let's say, hose line or instrument you use to put it out.
Hmm.
And that is that. So in that sense, a lot of the research went out to, yeah, to give different results. The same with smoke cooling, of course, where also we found out that it doesn't matter very much how you do it.
Mm.
And there was, you saw that the doctrine was like that that is, at least that is now my conclusion, that is that in theory we know everything about fire. And we know also what is the best way to fight it. But in the real situations, this theory is very difficult to apply because there is a lot you don't know.
I
Tactical
think what the
ventilation, it works.
Quadrant model
If you
does
know
do for
everything.
me, though, is it helps for experienced firefighters or officers, it helps put into words or a structure those things that you've ended up doing, but in your head you've got a logic thread. But if I try to explain to you what was my thought process behind the tactics and the techniques that I've used, what I think the Quadrant model does very nicely is give a nice framework sometimes to explain what your approach is. So for 1 second, I'll just do a quick read from the document, and we'll make these documents freely available to everybody as well. So firstly, we're looking at top level strategy. So this is the operational strategy referring to the objective of the fire service wants to achieve with its suppressive operations. So this might be rescue, enable of evacuation, prevent the fire from spreading to adjacent buildings, or extinguishing the fire. And then what's referred to as the quadrant model is the operational tactic, which is the method that is used to manage the incident in accordance with the chosen objective. So this will be the 4 quadrants being defensive exterior attack, offensive exterior attack, defensive interior attack, and offensive interior attack. And that's when we go into the techniques. What I think sometimes people do, certainly because when we're training firefighters in the UK, we train them in a steel box, and we don't encourage them to adopt some of what we believe are solely incident commander behaviors, such as the 360, reading the smoke, reading the building, looking at what the ventilation profile of the building is, any external influences on the ventilation. We just go straight into technique when we're training firefighters over here. So a number of techniques listed in the document: a high pressure fire hose, low pressure fire hose, gas cooling, ventilation, compressed air foam, fog nail, piercing nozzle, cold cut systems like the Cobra systems that we have here in the UK. We do a lot of training on techniques, but I don't think we give firefighters the knowledge of the tactics. I think we reference the strategy when we're giving a brief. We'll say, 2 persons unaccounted for, I want you to carry out a rescue of the first floor, and then you go in with a brief of da 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 da. But we tend to brief our firefighters with very granular detail about what we want them to specifically do, which I think limits their freedom to make their own tactical decisions when they're in there. Because ultimately I can do the best 360 in the world. I can check the ventilation profile, I can see the windows and doors that are open, I can get fans ready outside, I can ask for certain branches to be laid out, but I've still not been in the building. So I do need to give the firefighter some freedom in their tactical approach when they go through that door.
Yeah. You're saying a lot, so I don't know what to answer. But I think you are. I think it is both necessary. Firefighters that don't know how to deal with a hose line, it's also not okay.
Yes.
I think you are right that these tactics are very important, and maybe that is what we were forgetting in our exercises. But
how
also,
granular do you go in the detail of briefing firefighters? If when you're turned up at an incident and you're going to send a team of 2 or 3 in. In fact, before we do that, because I know people will still keep thinking in their mind, we haven't spoken about the 2 incidents. Take us to the 2 incidents. With respect to the families and the individuals that lost their lives, what was the nature of the incidents? What were they? And what were some of the reflections in the debriefs, if you can recall?
Well, you mean the 2 fires that I evaluate? Well, both of them were warehouses, and smoke showing. The location of the fire was not known, and firefighters didn't see the smoke as very dangerous, and they just went in trying to find the fire, and went in very, very far into the building. So they didn't take the shortest route, so they didn't do the 360, so just went in through the front door. You arrive with your appliance in the front door, and you go in and you could try to find the fire. Maybe that was exactly also what I was taught when I was a young fire. So go in here, that was the command, go in here, find the fire. But we didn't do that with a hose line. I just went in and I had to close all the doors when I went in. But nobody told me why I had to close all the doors. I just did it because I was taught to. But later on we went in with a hose line because somehow we found out that the smoke smoke could be dangerous. So you should smoke, or when you find the fire, then you should prevent fire spread. I don't know if it is the same in the UK, but for example,
But
in
historically,
exercise.
sorry, did you say that you used to go in without a hose line and close the doors behind you?
In the well, when I was doing my firefighter education, we were just so we went to the door, and the crew commander said, "So go in here, take the left side, and find the fire, or find the victim, or find the gas bottle, or whatever." That is what I was taught, and closing doors was normal. But now I know, of course, that closing doors also isolates the fire. But that is not what they told me.
So we're talking about, to zoom out to the technical side of it, so we're talking about anti-ventilation there, because whenever anybody goes to any form of compartment, whether it be a large warehouse, but certainly more concerning in like a high-rise building, that building is designed to contain that fire. As soon as you open the door to the compartment, you're breaching the compartmentation and you're introducing air and increasing the ventilation
Yeah,
profile. So you are going to accelerate the fire in some capacity, unless you close the door behind you, unless you use smoke curtains and things such as that.
yeah.
But that
And
is,
that
again, it's the
principle
why
was
behind it,
already
isn't it?
there.
You're telling somebody to do something, but you're not telling them the why behind it.
Yeah, yeah. So this was already in our practical
Training.
training years ago, but we forgot because normally I think that normally it always went right. If you go in with your hose line, leave all the doors open, and you put out the fire, 90% of the cases. So why would you bother to close doors if
Well,
you
this was
experience?
in James Braidwood's like documents and his notes, his briefing to police officers, because they would be out there on the beat and they would arrive there before the fire service. He would encourage them not to carry out a rescue unless they could see someone in close proximity to the exit. But what he would tell them to do is go round and close all the doors and windows.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't tell anybody that now. We
No,
don't
and
tell
no,
anybody.
no, no. And
Nobody would even think about it. They go, "Why?
so
What are you
the
doing?"
quadrant model, it started with quadrant model, but in the end, it ended with the basic principles of firefighting. Maybe you also know that. And there, that is where we combined the research that, for example, UL in the United States did into ventilation and horizontal and vertical ventilation principles, but also our own research. And in fact, I tell all the firefighters in the Netherlands, this is not new. It is some kind of revival of the old
We
principles.
need to remember more than we need to learn.
Yeah, we lost track because, everybody who says that firefighters are not innovative is wrong, because firefighters want to be innovative, want to try out new principles, new ideas. So that is why we went to Sweden, and that is why we went to the United States to get the tactical ventilation and the pulse techniques and the smoke cooling. It is all not wrong. But you need to know a lot about fires and about fire development, and you need a lot about the exact situation. So tactical ventilation will work if you have the right situation, but the fact is that firefighters never know for sure that they have that the right situation. So I said that maybe we should make a hard reset and leave all these difficult things behind, because another problem, and that is I think the biggest discussion between in the countries about between instructors, fire instructors. So if you have all the time of the world to train, to practice, to be busy with training and theory and try out everything in firefighting, if you have all the time of the world, then you can maybe be a specialist in that, and then maybe you will be able to make decisions based on less information but still be safe. But that is not the situation that most of the countries have. In the United States, they don't have. In Sweden, in the UK, in the Netherlands, firefighting is maybe getting less and less. We have more other kind of rescue situations that we also have to train. So if you have all the time of the world, then you can make theory maybe into practice. But I don't believe that it is possible, at least not in the Netherlands. And I think nowhere in the world. These basic principles is just like, okay, so if you don't know that the fire triangle is also working for a firefighter, so when you open doors, then you are so more air is also more water, because the fire will grow and you need more water, and
Yeah.
that is where of course the containers come into the picture, because the container trainings, they are not wrong, but they are meant to teach you a certain skill or a certain.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they are demonstrations of how a fire
They're
could.
demo boxes to demonstrate pyrolysis and fire
Yeah,
growth and
yeah,
decay
but
and
they are
flash
not real
over.
fires.
Yeah,
So
it's not.
one of my
Yeah.
first incidents that for example, because you know what I, of course I don't have all the answers, but for example I started with saying to the firefighters, you know, experience is only experience if you know why it went right, why it went like it went. So of course if you open doors and it went okay, yeah, then that experience can only be, like, let's say, a right experience to do it again if you know why it went okay when you opened the door.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, there are situations where opening the door doesn't matter at all. If there is no direct flow path, let's say, towards the fire, or for example, if there is no fuel anymore because you arrived at the fire so late. So it is very simple. Either you don't have fuel, or or you need a lot of water, or you have a lot of so that fire triangle is always working.
Mm.
So when firefighters now, for example, so I went to a lot of fire stations and telling about our research and about our findings and also about our conclusions that we should make it more simple. And then all the firefighters said, "Yeah, but Ricardo, you know, we put out every fire with a high pressure hose line." And I said, "Okay, well, tell me one of your cases." Of course, not this case. And they said, "Oh, why do you think that it worked? Why do you think that it worked?" Taking into account that triangle. Now, and it is always like that. If you arrive at a fire too late and the fuel is already gone, yeah, of course, then you don't need much water to put it out. Yes,
No.
that is easy. And that is how you do the discussion with them. And the nice thing is, of course, that Paul Grimwood supported us also, because Paul Grimwood already wrote a lot and also did a lot of research into the tactical flow rates.
Mm-hmm.
And of course we took a different approach, but we came almost to the same conclusion. And that is, of course, because you know you never know how good a firefighter handles the hose line. So there is always some kind of slack
Mm-hmm.
between the best way and the yeah, the best possible way, etc. So if you take that into account, then of course, if you put out that fire with your high pressure hose line, so tell me, why do you think it worked? Now and then, of course, the last possible conclusion is, well, you are such a good firefighter because you know 100%, you were 100% effective in
Mm.
using your water. That is of course, that is a possibility, and then of course the situation will be different than
But
what I.
given how little you've been able to practice that, it's very unlikely that you are very good at it at all, because you've not been able to have that cyclic learning process enough times in a controlled environment with good data to actually know how effective you were or weren't.
Exactly, and most of the firefighters, they have a lot of experience, mainly in dwelling fires. So the accidents that we encounter are most of the time not in dwelling fires. We rescue the most of the people in dwelling fires, in domestic fires, but not in industrial buildings, because most of the time in industrial buildings, persons are already out of the building when we arrive. But the accidents with firefighters happens in the industrial buildings. So let's be a
So
little
what
bit more
happened
careful.
in these industrial buildings? Was there some sort of fire phenomena, or did they get lost, or what actually happened?
Yeah. Well, what we see, and that is that. So fires have changed over the years. So that is, of course, a conclusion that is being done all over the world. Especially, it started with UL that said, okay, if you open the door within 100 seconds, you will have a flashover. So if you can't find the casualty within 100 seconds, then you will probably be in a big problem. So, but in what we see in the industrial buildings is the lightweight constructions with the insulation, polyurethane or extended polystyrene in the roof, and that starts paralyzing, and the smoke is very explosive. That is what is happening. The building
So it's
is
a fire
close.
gas ignition is what happened
Fire
in the
gas.
beginning.
It is a fire gas ignition. Maybe it is not a backdraft or whatever, but it is a fire gas ignition that can originate because the building fills with that kind of smoke. But to be honest, the gases that ignite are not visible. So if there is no smoke, there can still be a lot of combustible gases inside the building. And that is what firefighters, they never encounter that because there is not many fires in industrial buildings. And if they are, then, well, they just do what they doing the exercises. And in exercises, we put the wrong image, so our exercises are not realistic. That is of course, what I'm saying now is that realistic fire training is not in containers, but realistic firefighting is taking case studies of real fires and putting them into an exercise. Then you can exercise a real, and if you have movies and photographs, then you can put the right image on the brains of the firefighters, because they don't have the right image on their in their view of how a fire develops.
Yeah.
One of my first fires, there was a fire in the school, and I saw pictures, and I think it was a wind-driven fire. But I asked the crew commander, so what did you do? And he said, well, I put a ventilator in front of the door. And I said, well, and it went okay, so nobody was hurt, but the fire spread. And I said, well, what did you think when you put that ventilator in front of the door? What was your, let's say, idea of what would happen? And then he said, well, of course I know that I will increase the fire, but the flames will get higher probably. But we could be very fast to the source of the fire, so we could put it out. But he did not take into account at all the smoke, which was also there and which he was spreading through the building and could probably ignite somewhere else. So they were lucky that they could put out the fire very fastly, but they would also have done that without the ventilator. But and then I realized that in these containers, when you put a ventilator in front of the door, there is almost no smoke. So of course, what you will see is that flames get higher, and that is what people think is going to happen when you use a ventilator. But they don't take into account the smoke, and that is of course the most difficult part, the most dangerous part. Okay, so that kind of so what I still think that we are not really there. So I'm now collecting case studies, so learning from real fires, and especially the fires that went okay, that went well. So not the fires where somebody made a mistake, because in my opinion, firefighters never make a mistake unless they arrive at the fire drunk. They just do what they were taught, what their experience tells them, and that experience can fool you. That can fool you. We will never get a 10. We can be happy if it is a 6 out of 10 instead of 10 out of 10, because we have to act in situations where you don't know everything. Collecting these case studies, we can find trends, and that is what we can then communicate with firefighters. So getting back to that debrief, I think that when I started, I was surprised, because firefighters in Amsterdam told me like, so you are a new officer, okay, so you are gonna investigate this fire. Well, they had very bad experiences with officers doing debriefs. They didn't feel heard, and I was just there, and I was just curious what happened. I wanted to know everything, so I just was listening to them and writing it down. And no changes were made. I just wrote down what they told me, and I tried to make a whole picture. And without knowing, I was doing something that turns out to be very important in debriefs. Namely, that a lot of firefighters were at the scene and nobody had the complete picture. So by just visiting the fire stations and sharing with them what I found and what other colleagues had told them, I was making a complete picture, and everybody was filling in. So this is now, of course, one of the main issues in the, let's say, in the aftercare, after incidents. But also, there is still in the Netherlands, I think, is still some kind of urge to find out what went wrong.
Yes.
And that doesn't create a safe environment for learning. And I think that by the research that we did into the human factors, we made a little bit of progress, because what I say is, okay, so the human factors are fooling you. So what did you think? Why did you do this, and what did you think is very important, because nowadays we can explain almost everything that went wrong by the human factor, by the sole leader that had to make all the decisions. So we are now trying to make a safety net, and somehow it seems to work, because nowadays we have, for example, a crew commander and an officer. They can ask for their safety net, which will be some other officer or crew commander that is just observing and helping them, because because we now accept that we are not perfect and that we will
So is that
have.
something they do actually at the incident ground? They will have someone shadow them.
Yes, yes. Of course, in our culture, that was not something you would do because, of course, we were taught that we were perfect. Because if you couldn't do it on your own, then you were a bad officer or a bad crew commander. And I think that this is a process that started maybe 10 years ago, and now it seems to work because we can now, if we look through the eyes of the human factor to decisions that were made, we always can explain by human factors. Time compression. That's, for example, now one of
100%.
the safety nets is not only that we send an extra officer, but also on the emergency center after 50 minutes they ask, are you in control or not? And if not, we do a size up. So we will send extra people. Because if you are not able to find or to extinguish a fire within 50 minutes, you will have problems because everybody will
50,
have to refill the BA.
15.
Yeah, 15.
15.
After 50 minutes, the control center will ask you, are you in control or not? And that has two functions. The first is your time compression, because we know now that people probably will be busy for half an hour, but they think it is only 10 minutes. So you will lose control of time for yourself. But we
Yeah.
know now, after 15 minutes, all the BA crews will be refilling their BA. So if you are not in control at that moment, the hose lines will not be occupied anymore. So within 15 minutes, we have to tell them, you are now 15 minutes on their way. And are you in control? Do you need extra?
So just to unpick that and slow down for a second. So within 15 minutes, 5 minutes, your control will request a priority message of some form, say if they're in control. That leads me perhaps into speed of attack and speed of that person's ability to deploy their tactical resources as quickly as possible. I have had many experiences of different services in the UK where we are glacially slow at getting people through that front door. And you're saying after 15 minutes, you'll expect a crew to have been in there. Let's use a domestic dwelling as a simple example. 2 up, 2 down, whatever. They'll have been in there, used up the entirety of a BA cylinder, and the first team will be out or have been in and out and made an effective attack on that fire within 15 minutes of arrival.
That is only when you go in, of course, when you decide to go in the building, but there is always a possibility that you stay outside. So anti-ventilation is now also a basic procedure. So you have to find the fire. If you cannot find it, or you don't know where it is, or you cannot reach it, or you don't have enough water, for example, then we consider that it will be, let's say, what we do, a predictable outcome, unless we can find ways to solve the problem.
I
So
agree with you,
within
and that reminds me
15 minutes,
of
you should know if you can deal with it or not. Within 50 minutes, you should know if you can deal with it or not.
definitely in the national BA challenges that we have here in the UK. We've just ran them again this year. You've got 30 minutes from arrival on the scene to carry out a couple of rescues. I think they bring out 2 casualties, maybe more than that. I think it's 2 casualties, and they extinguish a fire in some quite large buildings as a single team of 4. And I love to see that because they operate at a speed and a diligence and an aspect of shared accountability with all of the crew, and they're very, very effective, which is what perpetuates my frustration when I see the very slow deployment of other teams. And like you were alluding to earlier, but I'll just put it into words in my own way. I think we've had a successful incident when we've kept it to one building, or we've eventually put the fire out. But I think to myself, if we were much quicker, we could have contained that to a single compartment, quite easily, if we were much quicker at deploying our resources on the incident. But I love that analogy. Now, I know, yes, people will say, well, in the UK, Pete, we do, I'll make up for more resources. I will call for an assistance message within 15 minutes. So we do the same thing. But that's not a challenge that comes back from our fire control. That's simply down to the incident commander, usually, if they want to call for further assistance.
Yeah.
You could just be there for 20, 25, 30 minutes. Just send an informative message, let them know what you're doing. But, have you actually got control of this within 15 minutes? I think is a really strong challenge. and I think an appropriate challenge. Hmm. I wanted to ask you about.
Because these 15 minutes is a little bit, let's say, maybe it should be 30 minutes. But what we see in incidents where things could have been better, let's say it like that, not wrong, but not better.
I think if the challenge comes within 15 minutes, then by 30 minutes you will have those additional resources there. So
Yes, yes, and
you can always
exactly.
send
And
them
and
back.
what we see was
Yeah.
that tunnel vision and confirmation bias are two
Hmm.
things that is how
Not working.
your brain is fooling you. So if you you have a certain strategy or tactics that you start, the incident commander that started that tactic will in most cases not be able to change it when they see that the situation changed. So confirmation bias will tell him or her like, okay, but this is not what you want to see. You are still in the correct tactic, and that improves tunnel vision. So what we see is that people are not very easily changing their tactics when the situation is not like it was expected. They just don't see things, or maybe they see things, but they don't, it doesn't come in, yeah, so they don't act on it. And that human factor that of course politicians and fire chiefs they will not understand because they don't have the stress when they have to make the decisions. So all
Mm.
the information that you have to process as a crew commander or an officer in charge, that can be too much, so your brain will block certain
Yes.
information. And that is one, so and that is why, and if you understand that and you accept that it is like that, then you can also do debriefs which are safe enough to talk about also this kind of things. Because if you cannot talk about this, then you will be making these errors. Let's say, I will not say mistakes because that's for me, I don't think it is a mistake because
Yeah.
you are human. We are
Yeah.
human. So we cannot expect things that are above humanity. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's say.
You're managing your cognitive load, as we all do.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
you're not going to have the available mental bandwidth to properly assess all of this information as it's coming into you. That's
Yes.
why having that shadow, having that support, having those filters of a command structure to interpret and assess the outcomes of your intended tactics and what you thought was going to happen,
Yes, and that's not
you need to
because
have
you
that.
are a bad officer. Yeah, it's not because you are a bad officer or you're weak or you are not well trained or whatever or you are not stress resistant enough. But we just didn't know this. And that is, in my opinion, also that you won't talk about this kind of things if you don't accept that it is normal. If you feel that it is a mistake or if you feel that you were not capable of dealing with this incident, then you will probably not be able to talk about the things that really matter if it comes to making decisions in this
Mm.
kind of stressy situations. And since the fires have changed, experience is not always our best advisor.
No, I would absolutely agree, because that's that confirmation bias. I wanted to ask you a very granular question, a very low level question, just because it came in from a listener when this person's a fire behavior instructor, and they had heard that you guys and girls over there had swapped out the BA shuffle back to teaching your students solely to stay low and focus on what's the base level training of
Well,
do you
yeah, well, we stay low, but only if it is necessary, of course. Eh? So if we and that's of course strange that we didn't teach people that, because nowadays if you walk through smoke and it gets hot, we saw that our firefighters just went walking straight up. So, and even I was taught when it gets hot, there you go down. So that is strange. But still, we were teaching people like walking like this in the smoke, but that smoke is not always cold. So if the smoke gets hotter, then you should go down. But what we didn't teach them is how to move forward with a low hose line when
yeah
you are low.
yeah
So that is what we are teaching them now. And of course, there's a lot of discussion, but because now they say, oh, when you crawl on your knees, then your suit will probably
degrade over time, or damaging it?
degrade over time, and maybe in exercises they're already degrading too much and it costs a lot of money. But that is not what we teach them. We just want them to go down if it gets hot, But as a matter of fact, I would say if it gets hot and the smoke is until your knees and you cannot see your feet, well, maybe you shouldn't go in at that
Yeah,
moment.
maybe.
Maybe you should stay out and find another way to get to the fire. For
Hmm.
example, by an exterior attack, or maybe you should maybe wait until there is a flashover, something like that. But if you go in, if you feel that you need to go in, for example, to rescue a person, and you want to find that person, the best way to do that when the room is completely filled with smoke is to go down, because you can look underneath the smoke. You can use your torch to see if there is an inflow of air, etc. So there is a lot of advantages to go low. But we didn't teach them how to move forward when they were low. We just teach them to walk like this. And that is, and of course, again, there is people that say, "Oh, but this is wrong." No, of course this is not wrong if there is no need to go down. But if you need to go down, then you need to practice how to do that. Especially because when I was in my firefighter education, we did not have a hose line. We just went in. And then if you had to go down, you didn't get on your knees. But nowadays you have a hose line. And this is I tried it, because we have. What I have is, of course, I organized a community of practice, because I was surprised. When I became a professor, some of fire instructors came to me and said, "Ricardo, the training and education, it is really bad. It needs to change. We need to do pulse techniques, etc. But it is bad." So I was surprised, because, of course, they were telling me things that I was never learned. I didn't learn. So I thought, like, "Oh, is this true? Wow, wow, wow." I was really surprised. But then I said, okay, but maybe we should talk about it. Yes. So then I organized a community of practice, and everybody in the fire service that had something to add was welcome. So in the prime time, we had maybe 30 fire instructors of all over the Netherlands that were talking together. And then one of the first things they told me was that it got too difficult. For example, you had, I don't know, is it maybe Be Safe in the UK, but in our country it is RSTV, so Be Safe, and you had to read the smoke, and it was difficult, and nobody really did it, and it was difficult to teach. So, and then I said, okay, maybe we should make it easy then. Everybody was, yeah, but I said, yeah, but we need to practice more. I said, but that is not an option, because we 80% of our firefighters are on-call firefighters. They have only one evening of practice a week. So this is not a realistic option. So let's make it easy. And then they came up themselves. I didn't think of that. That was the fire. They said, okay, but in fact it is a fire triangle. I said, oh wow, now I understand again.
Hmm.
I learned, as a matter of fact, most of the things that I know about fires, I learned from the fire instructors. But together we went into a process of how can we make it simple for the normal firefighter. And then they came up with that fire triangle. And then I said, oh wow, but that fire triangle, I knew about it, but I never applied it in a fire. That is strange. So we
Yeah.
tell citizens, we tell them about the fire triangle, but when we attend to a fire, we don't use it as a fire service. That is strange. So I was really surprised about that.
One of the most basic things I always like to sit with crews if I'm visiting a station and they want to discuss fire behaviour, we'll just look at a picture, just pull anything up off YouTube, and I say to them very quickly, is that a fuel controlled fire or a ventilation controlled fire? Let's just sit and look at that image or look at that video and let's just decide. Because if I say to people, what sort of fire is that? They'll go, it's a house fire. I go, yep, okay, it's a house fire. That's the structure that it's in. But what is controlling that fire? Because we don't know how hot it is. I mean, we could put a thermal imaging camera on it, but let's just step away from the heat element of it at the moment, because it's obviously on fire, because there's going to be some heat somewhere. What is stopping that whole thing from being on fire? Why am I not stood in front of a bonfire now? What's controlling it? Is it fuel controlled or is it ventilation controlled? Because that for me is one of the first things I think about when I'm walking up to any incident, because that will be the first thing that lends into what tactics I'm going to look at exploring, or the speed at which I'm going to allow my firefighter to deploy into that building. Is there any other actions I want to take before I put firefighters into there? What direction of the building am I going to put them into it? What am I going to send them in with? That's a very simple question. And I'm not trying to be derogatory or condescending by calling it simple, but trying to just quickly make that decision about what is controlling this fire in front of me should automatically start leaning you to, even before you've spoken to the occupier, even before you've spoken to the person, because they might be lying to you.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
not,
yeah, yeah.
it's the difference between information and intelligence. I've just learnt some information, but I don't know if that's intelligence because what's the validity of this person? Who are they? They might just be a wandering drunk. They might be a neighbor. They might start the fire.
Yeah,
Do you know what I
that's
mean?
true.
They might have never been in the building before. They say they're the occupier. Have you got time to check their records to see if they live there? Have you got a piece of postal information you can prove your identity, please? No.
No,
So
and you don't have the time to do that. Yes.
you don't have the time to do that. So I'm going to lend a little bit of weight to the information that they give me. But I need to know how to read that building. And I don't think it's the incident commander should be the only person doing it. One of my frustrations is when a breathing apparatus team, would tell them to get rigged up and they have this head down, blinkered look on their face where they're just sorting out their fire, they're sorting out their set and their BA set, and they're walking to the board and they're just waiting for you to tell them what to do. I would like them to have had a look at the building with the thermal imaging camera. I want them to have just looked down the side of it and had a glance across the front of it, so that they've got an understanding for what they get. They should be able to tell me where they think the fire
And
is.
and
They
that is
shouldn't be waiting for
important.
me to tell them.
Yes, and that is important because that takes time, and we didn't give ourselves the time to do that. So we were just used to use our experience, and we always would go in. We wouldn't look at where is the fire or is it fuel controlled. By the way, fuel controlled or ventilation controlled, I still get when we collect case studies, yes, and I ask crew commanders, what do you think? Most of the time, they are not able to really distinguish. So for me, what I say is then, okay, let's just assume that most of the fires are ventilation controlled. So we act like they are ventilation controlled. And if you have a ventilation controlled fire, you should fight it ventilation controlled. So and maybe sometimes it is fuel controlled, but most of the time, yeah, well, there are situations that they think, for example, it is fuel controlled, and I say no, this is not a fuel controlled fire. But for example, if the flames, so if you have an unidirectional or
Unidirectional, yeah.
bidirectional flames, that is very important because then you know if there is a door open
Yeah.
or if the building is
So
closed.
just because I want to be respectful of people that don't have a great deal of information new to the fire service. So if we go to a building and the front door is open and I can see a window on the first floor that's failed, if there's no smoke pushing out of this front door and I can see visible flame and smoke out of the top floor, it is most likely a unidirectional flow path.
Yes.
Now, a good indication that I could see with that, like if I put a positive pressure ventilation fan at the front door and I switch it on, I should see an acceleration of the exhaust gas and or the fire. If I switch that on and nothing happens upstairs, something's happening in the building, but there's likely a closed compartment. The door to that compartment is either closed or there is a block of some compartment between me and there. So I should switch it off because I am pushing gas somewhere into the building, but I'm not making it any better. Because ideally, if I'm going to put a PPV there, it's because I want to clear the path, because I want my firefighters to get up there really quickly, get straight on that fire and make a fast attack. But also, if I've got visible flame and smoke there, what's your thoughts on exterior attack? Because it's one of the models that we see in there, and there's very differing opinions. My thought is see flame, hit flame, is what I always say to people. So if you can see flames coming out of that first floor, put a jet in it. Put a jet in it, yeah, straight stream, directly, diagonally hitting the ceiling, and allow that to dissipate and make an effect in the room. As soon as you stop seeing flames, switch off. Do you know what I mean? But I say if you can see flames, you should be hitting the flames, and make sure, because people have this thing about air entrainment where they're like, oh, you're going to push all that smoke and everything onto the crew that's coming up the stairs. Yes, if you use a slight cone, you are going to be pushing air into that compartment. But straight stream, exterior attack at an angle, which again, with respect, Braidwood was talking about this 100 years ago. And this is nothing I've come up with.
No,
He
that
says
is true.
about standing the opposite side of the street, straight stream through the window, and that dissipation. And I think it was Stefan Svensson, I think it was Stefan that I had on. No, I don't think it was Stefan. It was
Oh, I
Brent
think it
Brooks.
was UL that they did these experiments in New York in these real buildings where they showed that it worked.
Yeah, the
And
dissipation of water.
of course, the myth that we have then is that it creates a lot of steam and that firefighters could get burned. That is, and probably that is also true. But this, I use this case as an example where we see that experience that you don't understand cannot be, let's say,
Can't be
used.
relied upon as wisdom or knowledge
Yeah,
in the future
because
because
so
it's just an
probably
experience. You
it
didn't
is
learn
true,
anything from it.
but we don't know anymore. So probably it is true that there has been a situation ever again, some time when they put in the hose line from outside and people got steamed inside. We don't know. Was it because they used a cone, let's say a spray stream, for example, or we don't know what the ventilation part was, but it is some kind of worldwide firefighter myth, and still people are convinced that it would happen. Yes, and there is also a movie from some Chinese, I think Chinese somewhere in
Yeah.
Asia, where they did that, and you see that the puppet or the firefighter was blown out. So this is still, but then if you look at it better, then you see that they use that cone stream, and that is something that we that that
I think, sorry, just to interject there, there's one thing that we get wrong as well because when we do this demonstration in a metal container and we put in a straight stream or a cone into say a side compartment that's got a window open and then there's a corridor and you've got temperature probes in the corridor and you put a jet in through an exterior attack and your temperature probes show an increase and then people go see, and I'm like, right, slow down for a second. That's a metal box you've been burning in all day, so the thermal capacity of those boundaries have already been exceeded and they are steel. So yes, if you spray water onto hot steel, it is going to turn into steam very quickly and you will see an increase. It's different than putting it in a brick built or wood built building where you've already got an exhaust. The thermal capacity is, they've not turned into actives yet. There's still passive ability in those boundaries to absorb that increase in temperature. It's not going to travel through like it does in a series of steel boxes. But I just wanted to talk about bidirectional quickly because I realized we jumped past it because people that are new to the fire service might still be wondering what that is. So bi meaning two, uni meaning one, bi meaning two, bidirectional is like the front door is the only door that's open and you see heavy pulsating smoke, maybe like a meter or whatever, but there's a clear air going in at the bottom. And you might see, if you look with your torch, you can see an in train of air, and then it's pulsing out of the top. So you've got it going in at the bottom and coming out at the top. So an example of that being again like in a high-rise building, if the windows haven't failed, a very well-built compartment, ideally, as soon as you open that front door, you will see a quick whip of entrained air at the bottom of it and lots of thick smoke pulsating out the top of it. So that's our bidirectional flow path. And then that's when we get into tactical ventilation, where it might be beneficial for you to find a window for you to do a controlled break on to allow a unidirect so that your firefighters are not walking straight into basements. Is always a typical conversation about a bidirectional flow path because you've got to travel down through that thermal layer. If you get really, really low and you shuffle down on your bum and you lean backwards, you can try and stay in that positive, cool, entrained air. But all of that hot combustible gas is going to be punching out and it's going to be very, very hot. So this is, again, just to get back into the movement element. I think we should spend 70% of our time teaching firefighters how to move low down, managing hose. John McDonough does some fantastic training sessions, and I would also say Gerard Mann does some fantastic training sessions about moving with hose. And if we say, oh yeah, but you're damaging the leggings, right, that's not our problem. That is, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, you have not given me appropriate personal protective equipment to deploy research-driven tactics in staying low and moving with this. So we should spend 70% of our time teaching firefighters how to move. Because if we say you need to do this special shuffle if you're standing up and you can't see, if you're standing up and you can't see, get down. Yeah, because your torch isn't going to work up there. You're just going to get a whiteout. Your thermal imaging camera isn't going to be as effective, and you're taking on all of this thermal heat. So get down. It's
yes,
just
that
such a
is interesting.
frustration for me.
Yeah, and that is what they always said, but they didn't teach us. And I remember that I had to do this, but that was for in the dark, not maybe not for in the smoke. So I don't
Yeah.
understand
But in
exactly
the
why they
dark, we've
did
got a
it.
torch now and a
Yeah,
thermal imaging camera, so I'm not going to do the silly shuffle, am I?
yeah. So that is
Welcome to the
true.
21st.
And but this is also that fire instructors in the Netherlands came up with, and I was not aware that we were still teaching people that. And but this is also fire service culture, yes. And I try to understand this because how come that firefighters always want to have only one solution, while in fact, in practice, they don't? So somehow they ask for from the teachers, from the fire academy, teachers what to do, and in practice they deviate from that. So if you teach them to walk like this, then they think that they were taught something wrong. But if you teach them to go down, then they say yes, but you don't need to go down all the time. And I said yes, but it depends. And that is what Stephen I learned
Depends.
from Stephen.
Depends should be in every single
But
training
but
process.
of course firefighters don't want it depends. They want to have one option. And I try to teach them yes, but there is not one option. You have to think. And of course, I make it as simple as possible so that you have to think as least as possible because I know that you are feeling a time pressure. If you have real time pressure, that is what I doubt. But so I think you can take more time to do a more professional. Strategy
Yeah,
or tactics,
observation and
because
dynamic risk
look,
assessment of the environment. John McDonough
making
narrows
your
this down to his
360 or
non-negotiables, doesn't he? So John has
yes,
his
and
non-negotiables: stay low, gas cool, put the
yes,
fire out as quickly as possible.
we copied them, So of course I was also part for a few years. Now maybe they don't like me anymore very much. I don't know,
No, John speaks very highly of you. John loves you.
but yes, because so I cannot deal with that. It depends. Yes, because I think that we cannot say to firefighters that are not specialists like Stefan Svensson or Joe McDonough. Van yeah, we don't know. It depends. That is not what we can send them away. So we have to make it easy for them. So I invited all the International Fire Instructors Workshop to the Netherlands, and John McDonough was there, and Steve Kurbers was there, and together we and also from Australia, the oh I forgot his name, the guy that fire instructor, he's still active, and he invented the
From
Be
Australia,
Safe from Australia. Sean, nee?
Shan Rafael.
Yeah, Sheriff.
Shan Rafael.
Yes,
Yep, I
he
forget
was
his name.
also there. So to get with a whole group of fire instructors from all over Europe, and also from Poland was there. I'm getting old. I'm getting
That's
old.
okay. It doesn't
All
matter.
these
Doesn't
names.
matter.
So,
I'll
but,
forget all the names
and
anyway. People know who we mean. I
Stefan.
think Lars is a very, very interesting character. We've had Lars on a
Yes,
few times. I really like Lars.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think
and he was.
where Lars sometimes communicates is so Lars will only teach instructors, which is good,
Mhm.
but we can get so very granular with some of the detail that Lars can go into, which is extraordinarily useful in certain circumstances. But I think sometimes it can leave firefighters more lost because Lars, because of his depth of knowledge, and again, I'm very, very political and respect him greatly,
Yeah.
he gets very granular with his detail, and there is too many depends in some
Yes,
of
and
the
that is what.
explanations.
Well, maybe Lars makes it more. Lars makes it more. Let's say more practical. Stefan is really very like. Okay, making. He is the guy that taught us it depends, and he is right. Yes,
Yeah,
because it depends. But that
yeah.
is the biggest problem for us. What do we teach firefighters then? And that is, of course, maybe also the discussion. So Peter McBride was also there. So we were together in the Netherlands, and I said, okay, John McDonough, you say that we have non-negotiables, but nobody supports you. So I would like it if all these people from all over the world are now gonna let's make together the real no negotiables, and I will adapt them. So for example, do the 360. It is in the basic principles. Stay low. It is in the basic principles. Cool the smoke. It is also in the basic principles. Only the discussion is about how do you cool the smoke, and
Mm.
uh, and now it Yeah, that is why we did a lot of research now. And in my opinion, it doesn't matter. You should cool the smoke. But how you do it, it doesn't matter. Because even we see that when we do the pulse techniques, where the compartment fire behavior trainers teach us, if you do them and you do them in experiments and real fire instructors do it, then even they touch the walls in a small compartment. It is difficult to teach, it is difficult to train, but it is not doesn't listen too exact, because you can touch the walls and it cools. And even if you don't pulse but you just cool the walls, it works.
Yeah, the arc method.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. So then I say, okay, if you want to pulse, fine with me. If you want to do cool the walls, also fine with me. The only thing is you have to do something. So, and how you do it, it doesn't matter, because in fact it is all the same. And
The
that
argument
is,
of penetration, the argument of the level of penetration is where people start coming in with straight stream methods, because your ability to reach the end of the compartment versus the pulsing method where you're only really creating an area of impact in a
that
few
is true.
meters in
Yeah.
front of you. If you're going to pulse, you need to do it really regularly and really consistently, and you need to move very quickly, in my personal opinion. I think if you go for more of a American style straight stream arc method, I think you're obviously going to use a lot more water, and that comes into an approach where the UK doesn't have as good a water supply as the Americans do and things like that. But again, you need to, I think the problem with the pulsing method is I see people using a pulse when they're in the fire compartment. Like when you're in the fire compartment, if you, so again, see flame, hit flame. What are you doing pulsing in that compartment when you can see the fire? You should be hitting the fire, and you should be getting out of the way of the flow path, letting all of those dangerous gases exit the compartment. But yeah, the problem, I think the pulse method is appropriate when you're advancing towards a fire. If you're going to move quickly down a corridor, very, very consistent, quite a narrow cone for me. Just keep pushing it, pushing it, pushing it, pushing it. And then as soon as you're in there, make an attack on the fire. If you can see, even if it's at the end of the compartment, make an attack on that fire as
Yes.
quickly as possible. But again, I think the pulsing method is more important in a bidirectional flow path because it's all coming at you. If you're in a unidirectional, yes, still pulse because there will be some smoke in that compartment and there's still a chance for a fire gas ignition whilst you're advancing towards the fire. But if it's unidirectional and the compartment itself has already failed and it's got its own exhaust, assuming the exhaust is big enough for people that are listening, like if it's a small exhaust, you'll still be getting somewhat of a bidirectional flow path. But it's less necessary. But again, I know I'm getting into the depth of the depends here. But
Yeah, 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 exactly.
where I think we fall down is just our speed of attack. And again, echoing back to the National BA Challenge, that speed of advance towards the fire compartment, I think, is a really crucial method in this. And like you say, as long as you're making progress and you're doing it with a sense of urgency, it doesn't really matter because the longer you spend in there, I always talk about in the UK when we have radiation incidents, we talk about time, distance, and shielding. Well, time, distance, and shielding is not inherently about radiation in its chemical sense. It's about radiation in general. It's about heat radiation, you know. So if you can reduce the time that you're in there, if you can shield yourself with a wall, with a door, and you can reduce the amount of time that you're in there, you'll increase your effectiveness. So it's about getting low, so you're not getting all that radiation hitting you in the face, and you're not taking on board all of that heat. You're moving quickly to reduce your time, and you're using shielding, so stay out of the flow path. But we don't do very much training with flow paths in the UK. We don't train
Well,
people how to identify flow paths.
well, that is of course one of the things that still puzzles me. Maybe we're getting to an answer now, because all the firefighters tell me that they feel that they are steamed if they use too much water. And the strange thing is that when, of course, I have also some teachers in the fire service of Amsterdam. When I was a young officer, there were these older crew commanders. And sometimes I meet them at funerals. That is, of course, not a happy moment. And then I tell them what I'm doing, and they say like, "But Ricardo, that is not true. You know, you get steamed if you use too little water." And I was surprised. Tell me, what is this? You know, I don't understand. But of course, you can have a lot of steam if you use a lot of water. And they said no, because if you use a lot of water, you will cool everything down. So there is no steam. No, I don't understand this. And this is and that is why we started doing these experiments, and also looking at how much steam is formed. And then of course we see that there is a lot of confusion about what kind of steam you are talking about. Is it the steam that is visible, or is it the water that is in a gas phase? And if the water is still in a gas phase, of course it is colder than when it is in a, let's say, a fluid phase. But there was something interesting that from the last experiments I learned, which I never thought would be like. So if you transform water to gas, of course it costs energy. So you extract energy from the smoke, yes? But that energy has not gone. It is still in the smoke, but not in fact in the water in the water that is in the gas phase. So if you don't get rid of that steam, the energy is still there, and it can condense on you. And what happens when water condenses on you, when you are the coldest factor inside? It will, let's say, give its heat to you. The energy has to come
Well, I
out.
think it's an
Otherwise it cannot
example of
condense.
Boyle's law. So when you apply a small amount of water, you don't destroy energy, you just change it. So it
Yeah.
transitions into
Yes.
water vapor
Exactly.
or steam. It goes through rapid expansion. And because the walls of the compartment haven't got any bigger, all it's done is increase the pressure. So as you increase pressure, you also increase temperature because you've not got anywhere for that energy to dissipate or go. So I think like we don't teach Boyle's law to people, but that's
No,
effectively what
but
it is.
that
If
is
it
what they say. Yeah, that is what they say. That the walls won't shrink, and that is why the pressure will increase. But nobody has ever proven that. So that is theoretically it is possible. So it is understandable. But there is also people that say no, because the gas shrink more than it expands because of the steam. So that is not still unresolved, I think. So there is different opinions about that. But what
when
I
it
teach.
cools enough, it will condense. That's the analogy. I
Yeah,
wonder. I've
it
not
will
seen the
it will
studies
connect.
like
So what you have to take care that the door is open
yes.
to get rid of the energy, and that is something that I didn't realize before.
You've got to have a good enough exhaust for
Yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff to escape, and you've got to stay out of the way of that flow path. So when you're applying
yes,
it, it goes through that rapid expansion. You don't want to be stuck inside it whilst it's
yes. So
happening because you will
somehow
feel the effect.
somehow you have to get out of that flow path if you are cooling. The Americans, UL, Steve Kerber, and they say, well, what we are doing is we are moving around with that hose line, and then we push the smoke out.
Yeah,
But of course, then I ask them, what do you do if there is no exit?
yeah.
What happens then? But they don't see a problem with that. That is the strange thing.
Well, I think the difference for them as well is they have a much more aggressive approach with ventilation. So their truck teams, the truck versus the engine will be the one going inside to do the fire extinguishment, but the truckies are prioritizing the ventilation profile. And like you alluded to earlier, they have a much greater focus on vertical ventilation. So we already know this really because in all of our attack boxes, we have a vertical vent that we create. So they seek to create a controllable ventilation profile, whether that be breaking windows or cutting holes in roofs, which in the UK we think they're absolutely stupid. But they are actually creating the most effective ventilation profile because it wants to go up and out, and you want it to go up and out because you want it to get away from you. And if you do that, if you achieve a vertical ventilation, or even a high level, horizontal ventilation, then you can get away with applying large amounts of water because you've got another team actively creating lots of vents for all of this
Yeah.
rise in pressure and temperature to escape from.
Yes, but at the same time, of course, all the research that UL did was to show the fire service of the firefighters in the United States not to make, let's say, all these vents, because it also has an opposite effect. For example, when I asked them, so why would you leave the door open behind you? They're looking at me like, oh, why do you ask? Because it seems the right way to do. And now I know that it is also to get, because the steam can get out over your head if you stay low. Then so as soon as the hose line opens, you need to have an exit, whether it's
Yes,
behind you or in front of you. And that
yes,
is something that I didn't realize when we started these experiments. But you learn gradually. And but of course, what is the our biggest challenge is, I think, to find ways which are theoretically correct and practically applicable. And there is a lot of things that is theoretically correct, but it's not realistic to apply in a real fire by firefighters, because you have to train them, they have to know have a lot of information. That is the biggest challenge. And then of course we chose now to make it simple, so that it applies always. But of course now firefighters say, okay, Ricardo, if we apply basic principles, and for example we are in an apartment building and we have a lot of smoke spread throughout the building, this is not in your basic principles, so maybe we should make some kind of second basic principle, so it's standard above the basic principles, because in an apartment building maybe, and then of course Grimwood and our German colleague
Harold.
Michael Reich,
Michael Reich,
he comes in, and Michael Reich is already for a long time promoting the keep your your staircase free of smoke, and that is now something that we are now thinking of to make that applicable for. So a lot of firefighters in the Netherlands already have the smoke curtains, for example, but it takes more people, because if you have to put the smoke curtain in place, that also takes more people. So and at the same time, the fire service in the Netherlands is decreasing the number of people in on an appliance. So we have some discussion.
What's your standard crew in now?
Well, the standard is still 6, but and that is something that I'm not fighting, but I try to argue that we should not make less than 6 standard, but they want to do that. So a lot of fire stations don't have 6 and can turn out in time. I think there are options to make it 6, or maybe turn out a little bit later, but make it 6. So now the trend is that they are allowed to get out with less than 6, but minimum 4. And the crew commander can decide, is he going or not. We call it the flexible
model, yeah.
Crew model. But now the fire chiefs say, okay, maybe we should make this a standard. And then, of course, I'm afraid that when you have 4 as a standard, the next step is that you are turning out with 2. And
so we turn out with 2. Do you have any tactical response style vehicles or variable response vehicles that turn out with 2?
No, not now. Well, it is starting now, and they call it innovation. Yes, so. And of course, everything is possible when you go. So sometimes the reasoning is, okay, so when we look at the statistics, most of the fires are small. So you can put them out with 2 people. But I think that is too narrow thinking, because improvisation, but also dealing with critical incidents is being done in a team. The smaller the team, the lesser the improvisation capabilities and the lesser the coping strategies as a team with critical incidents. So
I think you have to just be very clear with the tactics that are available to that crew. So with a crew of 2, I'd expect them to put the foundations in place, secure water, and carry out an exterior attack. But I think we're not clear enough with the limitations of a crew of 2. Yes, they can go to a small bin fire, a very, very, very small fire in the undergrowth somewhere, or a vehicle fire where there is no persons reported. Yep, they can go to anything like that. But what I see happening is them getting deployed to property fires with persons reported. And if they are the first crew in attendance, they need to be very clear of just get a situational awareness, read the fire, and carry out an exterior attack. That really is, there's maybe 1 or 2 others, but that's pretty much your choice of tactical options. You should not be considering any form of structural firefighting. And I even think, structural firefighting, internal structural firefighting with a crew of 4, has its limitations, and it's a very wide spectrum of the competency, experience of that crew. We're going through a tremendous amount of retirement in the UK, and we've got a lot of crews now. I read a statistic recently that 60% of the UK fire service will have less than 5 years experience.
Yeah.
That's worrying.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
For me, worrying's a bit condescending and offensive. It's not worrying, but it will bring with it a reticence and a nervousness for incident commanders. There's incident commanders out there with less than 3 years of experience. There's incident commanders that have never been in a structural fire themselves.
I think it's the same in the Netherlands. We are having problems even with finding firefighters at the moment, because we have too little people.
What do firefighters get paid in the Netherlands? Can I ask?
Every firefighter gets paid somehow. We don't have real volunteers, but we have, let's say, career firefighters, about 4,000, mainly in the bigger cities. But for example, in Eindhoven, which is a rather big city in the Netherlands, they have a crew of four. But they have two fire stations, so they will always attend to the same fire with two crews at the same time. And they are fast because it is a city with, yeah. But for example, when you are in the rural areas and you will be with four people, then it will take a lot of time to have a second appliance at the sec. But and then we have about 22,000 on-call firefighters, which get paid by the hour.
So you said, sorry, a full-time firefighter is on 4,000 a month?
About 4,000 we have, yes, in the bigger cities like The Hague,
Yeah.
Amsterdam,
So
Rotterdam.
how much do
Yeah,
they get paid though?
it
Really? Do
depends.
they not all get paid the same? A full-time firefighter on
No,
station
I
in the
think it's
city?
about. Well, I think it's about the same, but I'm not sure. It depends, of course, how many years. So you will grow in the years. Your salary will grow, but of course they have also a special.
Special
Let's say,
skills.
a special amount because they are in a roster, 24
Okay.
hour shifts with
Yes.
48 hours of free. That in that kind of schedules they have a special extra.
Yeah, so we
Yes,
have that.
but I think
We used to have day crewing models where you would do 24-hour shifts, and in some services they would get a pay increase because they do 24-hour shifts. But in other
yes.
services, it's the same as any other firefighter. And I think they can do a maximum of 5 24-hour shifts in a row, and then I think they have to have a minimum of 3 days off. I think that's how most services work
Yeah.
in
Of
the UK.
course, that is maybe the advantage that you aren't in the EU anymore because the EU directive says that how many hours
The
you
work
can
time
work in a
regulations,
week.
yeah.
Yeah, and that kind of thing. So that has been a big problem because we had to add firefighters a few maybe 10 years ago. We had to change to a 48-hour working week. Yes, 48 hour. Yes, and in total, so you can have two shifts in a week at maximum.
I think the
But
way
of
we
course,
got around
they
that
are.
was you doing 12 hours of stand down as part of that 24-hour shift. So 12 hours of that, you will respond to operational incidents, but you don't have to carry out any training or any risk work or you don't do any other duties other than you effectively become an on-call firefighter, but you must stay at the station. That's effectively what's happening there. You become a retained on-call firefighter for 12 hours of that shift, and that's classed
Yeah,
as some of their stand down.
I know that in Liverpool, what is it called? In Liverpool, they had that kind of constructions for the maybe the rural fire
Hmm.
stations where they didn't have many incidents.
Hmm.
But I'm not sure. But we are now also having problems finding them. So we used to have maybe 1,000 applicants for 12 jobs in the fire service, but nowadays it is decreasing very fastly. So for
Why do you
professional.
think that is? Why are we struggling to get people to join the fire service now?
Well, no, there in general we have not enough people that work. Let's say it is somehow yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. So I hear the complaint everywhere. They have problems finding fire officers. They have problems finding firefighters.
Mm.
But so maybe there is too much that's competence,
Competition.
concurrent competition. Yes,
Yeah.
competition, and maybe there are not many people anymore that have a real profession.
Hmm.
So they
Yeah.
are in higher educations and start producing paper instead of.
Instead of doing a job.
But that is, of course, that is my hobby to complain about all the people that just provide paper with words. That is some kind of layer in our society. Everybody has done academic studies and now they have to have a job. And so in the government, whole buildings are full of people producing paper.
Yeah, lots of people producing paper, not many people doing it. I wanted to take you back to something we discussed earlier that I just wanted to ask you about again. You spoke about culture and you spoke about humor on fire stations. Now, I think this is essential. I think we attract people to the fire and rescue service who don't feel like they can exist in a normal job. That's why they tend to be attracted to the fire and rescue service. And because of the nature of the work that we do need people to be eternal problem solvers. We need them to think differently. But I think with the high level of humor, dark humor, gallows humor that you have in fire stations, we're trying to get rid of a lot of that through, because there's been a lot of bullying and harassment, and there's some bad cases that I think are few and far between, but still too many. When we try and make the fire service like normal businesses or normal organizations, do you think that's a good thing, and how far should we go with it? Because I think if you try to sterilize it too much, it doesn't work.
I have a PhD student who did her PhD meanwhile, who did a special chapter on humor, on fire service humor. Well, the fact is that I think in our society we intend to focus on things that we think are not okay and enlarge them. So I think that fire service culture and humor are one, and they are connected. You cannot separate them. But every profession has its own humor. Even surgeons,
Yeah, of
urologists,
course.
banking people, they all have their own kind of humor. So what she proved is that this humor in the fire service is functional for the job that they have to do. And it starts even when you turn back, or maybe even when you turn out to an incident, it starts already. And it is a way of coping with the critical incidents that they encounter. And that is very difficult to understand for outsiders. But I know from my own experience as a fire chief in Amsterdam, of course, that there is limits. And this is the challenge that we have. So to determine when is this humor functional for the job and when does it become bullying. For example, when you bully your colleagues, yeah. So and what are the limits to it? So sometimes the black humor is going too far, and crew members start being irritated by it, or maybe so. And this is, I think, the leadership comes into the job. So
Definitely.
your fire service leadership needs to somehow know, okay, so now we are crossing a limit that we shouldn't, and you can only do that if you know a little bit about what the fire service is, because you cannot limit everything, and that is what civilians do. You know, when they listen to our jokes, probably they don't like our jokes. They don't like our jokes, and for me
But they also
personally.
wouldn't like our job.
No, exactly. So how? So that is a question that I want to answer with the research now. Is so okay. So if I am a crew commander or if I am a station officer, when do I have to limit and when do I have to let it go? And so somehow it requires a moral compass. Yes, but also understanding of how coping mechanisms within the team work.
Yeah. It's another
My
dependence
colleague,
conversation, isn't it?
yeah, well, yeah, but and of course, but you cannot leave it to the civilians because they always will criticize our way of humor, and sometimes I'm surprised, that because of course I I like fire service culture, so when I'm on the fire station and we are making jokes, and they say, yeah, but you are the deputy chief, so how can you laugh about this joke? And I think, oh, did I do something wrong? Well, this is, I think, is a nice joke.
Yeah.
Because, but of course, that is very dangerous, because people can say, okay, so you are too much into the culture of the fire service, so you need to leave. We are going to replace you by somebody who has a better,
Yeah.
let's say, moral compass. So
Yeah.
this is so what I try to do is to show that you need this. You need this humor, these jokes. You need them to cope with the situations that you have to deal with. And what we also showed is that dealing with critical incidents is mostly within the team. But of course, the leadership of a fire station or a crew commander, they need to know when the team is not capable of coping with that, and where they. So this is, I think, this is the art of being a leader in the fire service. That you need to know about. So what is the job? What is needed to deal with that? But when does it exceed limits that we don't want to exceed? And that is a challenge. Yeah, and if it needs a lot of experience, yes, it needs experience or really authentic being interested in the job or
Yeah.
in the
I
people.
agree.
What does
I think there's
drive them?
lots
What is their
there
passion?
for the context of a future conversation, but I want to be respectful of your time because I know we've gone over on time a little bit this morning. You're a very busy man. And I want to thank you incredibly for the nearly 2 hours you spent talking with this morning. But I'd love to speak with you again at some point, perhaps next year, and maybe we can make that a full conversation on leadership and culture and language. I think that would be a fascinating conversation, perhaps something people wouldn't expect. But I think that is some of the greatest challenges that we're facing. I think our comfort zone is to talk about fire and let's talk about gas cooling. But the challenges we're facing, a lot of them are cultural. They are around leadership, they are around psychological safety, they are around helping people keep wanting to come to work and loving the job. Because
Yes.
that's the biggest advert for the job. We only hear about the bad stuff. Certainly in the media in the UK, we hear a lot of cultural issues and reports around bullying, harassment, racism, sexism, and I think that's a very small percentage of it. But I think there's lots there for a future
I
conversation. But
agree with you. I read, of course, all the reports about it because I also have to deal with that. People from outside the
of course,
fire service are saying like, okay, but the culture in the fire service is not okay. We need to change that. And what I try to, well, I say, of course, in every organization,
free.
things happen that we don't want to. Also in the fire service, I'm not going to deny that. But the challenge is to find out where it exceeds these limits and then correct it. That is what we need to do. And I think that is a different
Correction,
one.
education, prevention, really the same way that we approach fires. Some stuff does go beyond the line and some of it is malicious and that should be dealt with disciplinary action and
Yes,
dismissal.
and I'm convinced, and that is what we are trying to do now. So my advice to the educational department, which is also in our fire service, is that we should pay more attention to the soft skills than we did ever before. Working in a team and being able to say what you think without being put aside by the team.
Mhm.
They call it psychological safety,
Safety.
social safety. And of course, from outside, they are saying, oh, the culture is bad. And I say, no, because we didn't teach people. We teach people to be strong, stress resistant, etc. But we didn't teach them to speak out what they think, to speak out for their thoughts. And maybe people think that they are not allowed to do that because they will disturb the team coherence. But that is not true. That is what they call it. How do you call it? A bad idea. It's not. This is an incorrect idea, which may be caused by how we train people and by not talking
Definitely.
about this.
Definitely.
So when I was a fire chief, I was in on the fire stations and I could talk about that, but because you need the language and you need to have the guts, and then you will see that most of the people, most of the firefighters in the team probably think the same, but they also don't want to say it. So
Definitely.
we call it the bystander effect. So
Yes.
yeah, so maybe one last example. When I was a young firefighter, and of course I saw that firefighters in the fire station, they were drinking alcohol. That was normal in Amsterdam in the 90s of the last century. And the firefighters had a rule that you could only drink 2 beers and only before dinner. And
Similar
you
in the
do
UK.
it, and you would do it in the canteen, yes, where everybody could see it. That is how they tried to confine, let's say, a problem. But I saw that, and of course, I could see that I was a young officer. I couldn't change that, but I thought it was strange. And one day, the fire chief said, "We are now going to stop with that." And I was the guy that went through all the fire stations talking about this, together with somebody who was a specialist in alcohol problems, because there were a lot of myths, like, okay, sometimes alcohol-free beer also smells like beer. Yes, so how can we as a crew commander see that it is not? Yes, so this kind of things. And the strange thing is that if you pay attention to that and you start a discussion with firefighters, all of a sudden it seemed like that it turned around. So
Mm.
apparently there were a lot of firefighters that also thought it was strange, but they didn't speak out. I did. I also didn't do that because I thought like, okay, so I'm the only one who is gonna think that this is strange.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it turned around,
Yeah.
and all the firefighters said, "Well, we are gonna stop with this." And there were only a few persons that still kept on drinking, but they had an alcohol problem, and we helped them. And some of them left the fire service. Some of them were helped and stopped being an alcoholist. But it turned out that all the time there was a very big group of firefighters that thought that we should stop with this. but nobody wanted to say because they thought that they would maybe have a problem when they would speak
Definitely,
out
yeah.
what they really think. And apparently they were expecting from the leadership to do that. But the leadership didn't do it
Uh,
until, of course, we decided that we should do it. And then everybody was thankful because, wow, finally we have a leadership that, no, this is a strange, but this is also culture. And I think that team cohesion, sometimes in the psychology, they call it the social
Social
cohesion is the
dynamics,
social ecology. The
social
fire
ecology,
service
yeah.
is a social ecology, and the social ecology becomes stronger when it is attacked from outside. For
Ah,
example, by the leaders.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And that is and the new leaders and all these guys that have academic studies probably would say that this is a bad culture.
Hmm.
But I
I
think that
think
is
there's lots there to unpack, and I'd love for us to go for
yeah,
another hour on it,
yes,
but I want
yes,
to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for your time today, brother. I
yes.
really do appreciate it. Please send my love to everybody, and I really look forward to speaking with you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.